She married a poor man, not knowing he was a hidden billionaire. She opened her husband's laptop to pay bills and found a bank statement with $2.8 billion in it. For 2 years, Maya thought she'd married the poorest man alive, a guy who worked 3 jobs just to afford groceries. But the man sleeping next to her every night? He secretly owned companies, private jets, and mansions around the world. And Maya was about to discover that everything, their entire marriage, their humble apartment, even their wedding, had been one carefully constructed lie. But the real shock wasn't how much money David had been hiding. It was why he'd been hiding it from the woman he claimed to love more than life itself. Family, if you're new to this channel, make sure to subscribe right now so you don't miss what happens next. And if you're one of our returning viewers, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Now, stay with us to the end of this story. Leave a comment with your thoughts and like this video if you believe in truth, love, loyalty, and justice. Let's continue. Maya was 28, working as a marketing coordinator for a nonprofit in Chicago, making decent money but nothing crazy. She had her master's degree, her own apartment, and dreams of maybe starting her own agency someday. She wasn't looking for a rich husband. Honestly, she dated enough finance bros to know that money doesn't equal happiness. But her family? They had different ideas. "Baby girl, you need to think practically," her mother would say every Sunday after church. "Love doesn't pay the bills. Look at your cousin Jessica, married that doctor, and now she's living in that beautiful house in Winnetka." Maya would just nod and change the subject. She tried the whole marry for status thing once before with Marcus, a successful lawyer who looked perfect on paper. Perfect car, perfect job, perfect credit score. He was also perfectly boring and treated waiters like they were invisible. That relationship lasted exactly 4 months. So when she met David at a community garden in Logan Square, she wasn't thinking about his net worth. She was thinking about how he spent his Saturday morning teaching kids how to plant tomatoes, and how his eyes lit up when he talked about sustainable farming practices. David Miller looked like he'd stepped out of a flannel catalog, worn jeans, work boots that had actually seen work, hands that were rough from real labor. He was white, from some small town in Wisconsin she'd never heard of, and he worked 3 jobs, morning shift at a coffee shop, afternoons doing landscaping, and weekends at a farmer's market selling vegetables he grew himself. "Most people think I'm crazy," he told her on their first real date, walking through Millennium Park. "Working this much for so little money. But I believe in doing work that matters, you know? Even if it means I'll probably never own anything fancy." Maya felt something in her chest flutter. Here was a man who chose purpose over profit. In a world full of people chasing status symbols, David was chasing meaning. Their first kiss happened 3 weeks later, right there in that same community garden, with dirt under their fingernails and the Chicago skyline glowing behind them. It tasted like possibility. But dating David meant dealing with everyone else's opinions. Her friends were polite, but confused. "He's sweet," they'd say, which is what people say when they can't find anything else nice to talk about. Her family was less subtle. "Honey, where's this going?" her Aunt Patricia asked at her birthday party. "You're not getting any younger, and this boy. I mean, what's his plan? 3 jobs and still can't afford to take you somewhere nice for dinner." The truth was, their dates were incredible. David would pack homemade sandwiches, and they'd bike to the lakefront. He'd surprise her with picnics in hidden spots around the city that only locals knew about. He'd cook dinner at her apartment, really cook, not just heat up frozen food, using vegetables he'd grown with his own hands. "I know this isn't what you're used to," he said one evening, watching her eat the most amazing pasta she'd ever tasted. "I can't buy you expensive things or take you on fancy vacations." "David," Maya said, reaching across her tiny kitchen table to take his calloused hand, "this is better than any expensive restaurant I've ever been to." And she meant it. But that didn't make the pressure from everyone else any easier. 6 months in, David started talking about marriage. Not in a pushy way, he'd just mention little things. "When we have kids someday, or in our house, we should have a big kitchen." Maya's heart would skip every time, but her practical side would kick in immediately after. Could she really build a life with someone who counted every dollar? Someone who shopped at thrift stores and drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic? Someone her mother would never fully approve of? The proposal happened on a Tuesday morning in February, in that same community garden where they met, now covered in snow. David got down on one knee and pulled out a ring that was clearly vintage, clearly not expensive, and clearly chosen with incredible care. "Maya," he said, his breath visible in the cold air, "I know I can't give you the world, but I can give you all of me." The ring was perfect. Small, yes, but it had character and history and love behind it. But what Maya didn't know, what nobody knew, was that David Miller had been lying about everything. Not about loving her. That was real. But about being poor? That was the biggest lie anyone had ever told. Want to know how deep this deception goes and what Maya discovers that changes everything? Keep watching. Maya said yes to that proposal, but the real drama was just beginning. Planning a wedding when your fiancé makes minimum wage and your family thinks you're making the biggest mistake of your life? That's a special kind of stress test for any relationship. "We can have a small ceremony," David kept saying. "Something simple. Maybe in the park, just close family and friends." Maya loved the idea. She'd never been the type to dream about some huge, expensive wedding anyway. But her mother? Her mother had other plans. "Absolutely not," Diane Johnson declared when Maya shared the news. "My only daughter is not getting married in a park like some hippie. What will people think?" "Mom, it's our wedding," Maya tried to explain. "We want something meaningful, not expensive." Meaningful. Her mother's voice got that sharp edge it always had when she was about to deliver some hard truths. "Baby, let me tell you what's meaningful: security. Stability. A man who can provide for you and your future children. This David boy seems sweet, but sweetness doesn't pay for a mortgage." These conversations were killing Maya. Every family dinner became an intervention. Every phone call with her aunt or cousins somehow turned into career advice about finding a better man. Even her best friend Keisha, who usually supported all her choices, was asking careful questions. "I just want to make sure you've thought this through," Keisha said over coffee one Saturday morning. "Like, really thought it through. What happens when you want to buy a house? What about kids? Private school? College funds?" Maya stirred her latte and tried to find words for feelings she barely understood herself. "Key, I know how this looks from the outside. Trust me, I get it. But there's something about David that's different. When I'm with him, I feel like the best version of myself." "That's beautiful, girl, but love doesn't pay student loans." The worst part was that Maya was starting to have those same doubts, especially late at night when David wasn't there and she was alone with her thoughts. She'd done the math. His 3 jobs brought in maybe $30,000 a year, if he was lucky. Her non-profit salary was $45,000. Together, they could barely afford a decent apartment in Chicago, let alone think about buying a place or starting a family. But then David would show up with flowers he'd grown himself, or surprise her with dinner he'd made from scratch, or hold her hand while they walked through the city and talked about everything and nothing, and all those practical concerns would melt away. The first major red flag should have been the wedding planning itself. "Don't worry about the cost," David kept saying whenever Maya brought up their budget. "I've got some money saved up. From 3 minimum wage jobs." Maya would ask, genuinely curious about how he was managing his finances so well. "I'm good at saving," he'd say with that easy smile. "And I've got a little help from family." The family thing made sense. David had mentioned that his parents lived on a farm in Wisconsin, and farm families were known for being tight-knit and helping each other out. Maya figured they were probably contributing a few $1,000s to help their son get married, the kind of generous but modest gift that hard-working rural parents might scrape together. But then the wedding venue fell through. The community center they'd booked had a plumbing emergency, and David didn't panic the way Maya expected him to. "I know a place," he said calmly. "Let me make some calls." 2 days later, he told her he'd found the perfect spot, a beautiful garden venue outside the city that normally charged thousands of dollars for weddings. "How much is this going to cost?" Maya asked, looking at the photos on the website. "Don't worry about it," David said. "I worked something out with the owner." Maya assumed he'd arranged some kind of work trade, maybe landscaping services in exchange for the venue. It was exactly the kind of creative problem-solving she'd fallen in love with. The wedding was perfect. Absolutely perfect. The venue was gorgeous, the food was incredible, and somehow everything felt both intimate and special. Maya's family was impressed despite themselves, and for the first time since the engagement, her mother actually seemed happy. "Okay," her mother whispered during the reception, "maybe this boy has more sense than I gave him credit for." Maya felt vindicated. See? David could make things work. He was resourceful and creative and determined. Maybe love really was enough. But during their first dance, as Maya looked around at their beautiful wedding that somehow David had managed to pay for, a tiny voice in the back of her head whispered, "How?" She pushed the thought away. This was her wedding day. She was marrying the love of her life. The details didn't matter. Except they did matter. And in 6 months, Maya was going to discover just how much David had been hiding from her. The truth would change everything she thought she knew about her husband, her marriage, and herself. But first, they had to live like newlyweds. And that's where things get really interesting. Family, if you watched this story up to this point, it means it moved you. Leave your thoughts in the comment and make sure to like and hit the subscribe button and like if you haven't. Marriage to David was everything Maya had hoped for and nothing like she'd expected. They moved into a small but charming apartment in Lincoln Park. Somehow David had found an amazing deal on a place that should have been way out of their price range. "The landlord owed me a favor," he explained when Maya asked how he'd managed to secure a one-bedroom in one of Chicago's most desirable neighborhoods for what they were paying for their old studio. David's mysterious ability to make things work was becoming a pattern. Not just with big things like the apartment and wedding venue, but with everyday stuff too. Groceries that should have stretched their budget somehow always appeared in their fridge. When Maya's car broke down, David somehow knew a guy who could fix it for parts cost only. When they wanted to take a weekend trip to Wisconsin to visit David's family, he'd casually mention that he'd gotten a great deal on a nice hotel. "You're amazing at this," Maya would tell him, genuinely impressed by his resourcefulness. "How do you always know the right people?" "Small-town connections," David would say with that easy smile. "People help each other out." Maya wanted to believe it. She chose to believe it. Because the alternative, that something wasn't adding up, was too uncomfortable to think about. But then small things started bothering her. Like the way David never seemed stressed about money, even though he should have been. Maya had grown up in a middle-class family where money was discussed, budgeted for, worried about. She knew what financial stress looked like, and David never showed any signs of it. Or how he'd occasionally use phrases that didn't quite fit his background. Once, at a farmer's market, he'd casually mentioned something about market volatility while talking to another vendor, then caught himself and switched back to talking about crop yields and weather patterns. And there was the phone call. Maya had been in the shower when David's phone rang. She heard him answer, and something in his tone made her pause and listen. Not intentionally eavesdropping. Their apartment was small and the bathroom door was thin, but she couldn't help overhearing. "No, we need to postpone the Singapore acquisition until next quarter," David was saying in a voice she'd never heard before. Authoritative. Businesslike. Confident in a way that didn't match the humble farmer's market vendor she'd married. Maya turned off the water, straining to hear more, but the conversation had ended. When she came out of the bathroom, David was back to normal, making breakfast, humming to himself, wearing his usual weekend uniform of jeans and a t-shirt. "Who was that on the phone?" she asked casually. "Just my buddy Mike from back home," David said without missing a beat. "He's thinking about expanding his farming operation." Singapore acquisition? For a farming operation in rural Wisconsin? Maya's marketing background had taught her enough about business to know that made no sense at all. But David was already talking about their plans for the day, and it was easier to let it slide than to start an argument based on half an overheard conversation. The doubts kept accumulating, though. There was the way David's hands looked. Yes, they were calloused and rough, but Maya had started noticing that the calluses were in weird places. Not consistent with the kind of work he claimed to do. She dated enough different types of guys to recognize construction worker hands, office worker hands, service industry hands. David's hands didn't quite fit any category. There was his knowledge about things he shouldn't have known about. Art, for instance. They'd gone to the Art Institute one weekend, and David had casually mentioned details about brushwork techniques and art history that went way beyond what you'd pick up from casual interest. "How do you know so much about Impressionism?" Maya had asked. "PBS documentaries," he'd said quickly. "I watch a lot of educational TV." Maybe. Or maybe not. The breaking point came 3 months after their wedding, during what should have been a normal Tuesday evening. Maya had been working late, finishing up a campaign proposal that was due the next morning. She'd texted David that she'd be home around 9, but her meeting ended early and she caught an earlier train. She walked into their apartment and heard David on the phone in the bedroom, speaking in that same authoritative voice she'd heard once before. "The quarterly reports look good, but I want to review the European expansion plans before we commit to anything," he was saying. "Also, make sure the Charity Foundation increases their education grants by 15% this year." Maya stood frozen in their living room. Charity Foundation? European expansion? This wasn't farm talk. This wasn't minimum wage worker talk. This was executive-level business conversation. She crept closer to the bedroom door, her heart pounding. "I don't care what the board thinks about my personal choices," David continued. "My marriage is not up for discussion. Yes, I know they're concerned about public image, but Maya doesn't know anything about the company, and that's how I want to keep it for now." Maya felt like she was going to be sick. Company? What company? And why were people discussing their marriage in what sounded like boardroom meetings? David's voice was getting louder, more animated. "Look, I built this from nothing, and I'll make decisions about my personal life however I want. The shareholders can trust me or they can find another CEO." CEO. Maya's legs gave out and she sank onto their couch, mind reeling. Her husband, her sweet, humble, 3-jobs-working husband, was apparently the CEO of some company big enough to have shareholders and board meetings and European expansion plans. What else had he been lying about? And how was Maya going to confront him without destroying everything they'd built together? Maya sat on that couch for 20 minutes, listening to her husband wrap up the most important business call she'd never known he was capable of making. Her mind was racing through every conversation they'd ever had, every explanation he'd given for his mysterious resourcefulness, every time she defended their simple life to her skeptical family. When David finally came out of the bedroom, he looked exactly like the man she'd married. Jeans, old t-shirt, the genuine smile that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. "Hey beautiful, you're home early," he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead like this was just another normal evening. Maya looked up at him and felt like she was seeing a stranger. "David," she said slowly, "we need to talk." Something in her tone made him freeze. She watched his face carefully, looking for tells, for signs of the panic or guilt she expected to see. Instead, she saw resignation. "You heard the phone call," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. CEO. Maya's voice cracked on the word. "You're the CEO of what, exactly?" David sat down on the couch next to her, but Maya instinctively moved away. The distance between them felt like a canyon. "Miller Industries," he said, running his hands through his hair. "We do sustainable technology development. Clean energy, agricultural innovation, water purification systems for developing countries." Maya stared at him. "Miller Industries? Like the Miller Industries that's been in the news for their environmental work? The one that donated $50 million to climate change research last year?" "Yeah. That Miller Industries." "Yeah." Maya felt like she was in a dream. Not a good dream. One of those weird, disorienting dreams where everything looks familiar but nothing makes sense. "So when you said you worked 3 jobs?" "I was lying." "And when you said you were from a small farming town?" "I mean, technically I am. I grew up in rural Wisconsin. My family did own farmland. But we also owned a lot of other things." Maya stood up and started pacing their small living room. "How much money do you have, David?" "Maya, that's not what's important here." "How much?" she shouted, surprising herself with the intensity of her anger. David was quiet for a long moment. Forbes estimated my net worth at around $2.8 billion last year. The number hit Maya like a physical blow. She had to sit back down. Billion, she repeated numbly. With a B. Yes. And you let me worry about whether we could afford groceries. You never had to worry about groceries. I made sure of that. By lying to me. Maya was shouting again. David, I spent our entire engagement defending you to my family. My mother thought I was throwing my life away marrying a poor man, and I told her that love was more important than money. I gave speeches about how shallow people are for caring about wealth. I felt superior to my materialistic friends because I'd chosen substance over status. You did choose substance over status, David said desperately. You chose me when you thought I had nothing. But you don't have nothing. You have everything. Maya was crying now, angry tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. Do you have any idea how humiliated I feel right now? How stupid. Maya, please, let me explain why I did this. Why? She laughed bitterly. Yeah, David, please explain why you built our entire relationship on a lie. David took a deep breath. Because every woman I'd ever dated before wanted me for my money. Every single one. I'd meet someone, we'd have great chemistry, and the minute they found out about Miller Industries, everything would change. Suddenly they'd care more about where we went to dinner than what we talked about over dinner. So you decided to lie to me instead? I decided to find out if someone could love me for who I am, not what I own. Maya felt her heart breaking and her anger intensifying at the same time. But who you are includes being incredibly wealthy. That's part of your life, your reality, your identity. You didn't let me love the real you, you made me love some fictional character you created. The character isn't fictional. I do care about sustainable farming. I do believe in doing meaningful work. I do love working with my hands and growing things. All of that is real. But the 3 jobs were fake. The money struggles were fake. The humble apartment hunting was fake. Maya stood up again, needing to move. God, David, even our wedding was fake. You didn't get some amazing deal on that venue, you probably just bought it. David's silence confirmed her suspicion. Did you buy it? I may have made a significant donation to their non-profit program. You bought our wedding venue. Maya, I wanted to give you the wedding you deserved. The wedding I deserved was an honest one. Maya grabbed her purse and jacket. I need to get out of here. Where are you going? I don't know. Anywhere that isn't here with you. Maya, please don't leave. We can work through this. She turned back to look at him, this man she'd thought she knew so completely. Can we? Because I don't even know who you are. I don't know what else you've lied about. I don't know if anything about our relationship has been real. My love for you is real. Maya felt fresh tears starting. How am I supposed to believe that when everything else has been a performance? She walked toward the door, then stopped. Oh, and David? That phone conversation I overheard? Something about the board being concerned about public image and me not knowing about the company? Were you planning to tell me ever, or was I supposed to just keep playing the role of the naive wife forever? David's face went pale. Maya, that's not what that was about. I don't want to hear any more lies tonight. Maya left their apartment and walked out into the Chicago evening, feeling like her entire life had just exploded. She'd married a man who didn't exist, built a marriage on foundations that were completely false, and worst of all, she had no idea what was real anymore. But this was just the beginning of what Maya was about to discover about her husband's secret life. Maya spent that night at Keisha's apartment, crying into a pint of ice cream while her best friend listened to the whole story with a mixture of shock and I told you so energy she was trying very hard to suppress. So he's a billionaire, Keisha said, scrolling through Google search results about Miller Industries on her laptop. Girl, look at this. Your husband is literally on the Forbes list. There are articles about his charitable giving, his environmental work, his business innovations. He's like, famous. Stop, Maya said. burying her face in Keisha's couch pillows. I don't want to see it. Maya, look at this photo. Keisha turned the laptop toward her. This is from some gala last year. Against her better judgment, Maya looked. There was David in a perfectly fitted tuxedo, looking confident and polished and completely different from the man she'd married. He was shaking hands with some politician Maya recognized, surrounded by other wealthy, important-looking people. That's not my husband, Maya whispered. That's exactly your husband. That's who he really is. Maya stared at the photo. The man in the tuxedo had the same face, the same smile, but everything else was different. His posture, his expression, even the way he held himself screamed wealth and power and confidence. This was a man who belonged in boardrooms and country clubs and charity galas. The man she'd married belonged in community gardens and farmers markets. I don't understand how I didn't know, Maya said. How do you hide being a billionaire? Wouldn't there be signs? Apparently he's really good at compartmentalizing, Keisha said, reading more articles. Listen to this quote from a business magazine interview. Miller is known for his intensely private personal life and his ability to separate his corporate identity from his personal interests. Despite his wealth, he's often spotted at local farmers markets and community events, leading a surprisingly modest lifestyle. Modest lifestyle, Maya repeated bitterly. Right. But even as she was angry, a part of Maya's mind was starting to process what this all meant. David hadn't just lied about having money. He'd created an entirely different identity. The community garden, the farmer's market, the sustainable farming interests, those weren't lies exactly. They were real parts of who he was. But they weren't the whole picture. Her phone had been buzzing with texts from David all night. She'd been ignoring them, but finally she looked. Maya, please come home so we can talk. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I never wanted to hurt you. There's so much more to this story. I love you. That part was never fake. Maya showed the messages to Keisha. What do you think I should do? Honestly? I think you need to go home and have a real conversation with him. Get the whole truth this time. What if I don't like what I hear? Then at least you'll know. Maya went home the next morning, expecting to find David waiting anxiously for her. Instead, she found him making breakfast like it was any other day, except he was wearing clothes she'd never seen before, expensive-looking jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than her monthly salary. You look different, she said. I figured there was no point in hiding anymore. They sat across from each other at their small kitchen table, and Maya realized that even the way David sat was different now. More confident. More authoritative. Like he was settling into his real self instead of performing humility. I want the whole truth, Maya said. Everything. From the beginning. David nodded. I inherited Miller Industries from my grandfather when I was 25. It was already a successful company, but I grew it into what it is today. I've been CEO for 8 years. And the farming thing? I really did grow up on a farm. I really do believe in sustainable agriculture. When I moved to Chicago 5 years ago, I was burned out from the corporate world. I started spending time at community gardens and farmers markets as a way to reconnect with what I cared about. But why the fake identity? David was quiet for a moment. Because I was tired of being seen as a wallet instead of a person. Do you know what it's like to never know if someone likes you or likes what you can buy them? I'd been through 3 relationships where women pretended to care about me but were really just excited about the lifestyle. Maya could understand that, even though she was still angry. But David, there's a difference between being private about your wealth and actively lying about being poor. I know. I know that now. But when I met you, and you were so genuine and kind and unimpressed by material things, I got scared. I thought if you knew the truth, you'd change. Like everyone else did. So you decided to test me. I decided to let you fall in love with who I really am at heart, without all the complications money brings. Maya looked around their apartment that she now realized probably cost David pocket change. This whole life we've built together, is any of it real? My feelings for you are real. My values are real. My commitment to our marriage is real. David reached across the table toward her hand, but Maya pulled back. Maya, I know I handled this wrong. I know I should have told you sooner. But I was terrified of losing you. Well, congratulations, Maya said, standing up. Your worst fear came true anyway. But even as she said it, Maya wasn't sure if she meant it. Because looking at David now, really looking at him, seeing him as he actually was instead of as she thought he was, she realized something complicated. She was still attracted to him. Maybe even more so. And that scared her more than anything. The real question wasn't whether she could forgive David for lying. It was whether she could trust herself to know the difference between love and the intoxication of wealth and power. Over the next week, Maya felt like she was living in two different worlds. At work, she was still regular Maya Johnson, marketing coordinator, worrying about campaign budgets and client presentations. At home, she was Mrs. David Miller, Billionaire's wife, surrounded by luxury she was only just beginning to recognize. Because once David stopped pretending to be poor, their apartment transformed. The great deals he'd found were revealed to be expensive pieces he'd carefully selected. The organic groceries that mysteriously appeared were delivered from premium services. Even their simple weekend activities took on new meaning when Maya realized David could afford to do literally anything in the world, and he was choosing farmers markets and bike rides along the lakefront. I need to understand something, Maya said on Friday evening, after they'd spent the week dancing around each other, both trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality. If you can afford anything, why do you live like this? David was cooking dinner, something he'd always done, but now Maya wondered if he'd learned from private chefs or expensive cooking classes. Because this makes me happy. The money is a tool, Maya. It lets me do work I care about, support causes I believe in, and not worry about practical things. But it doesn't define what brings me joy. What brings you joy? He looked at her with an expression so genuine it made her chest ache. You do. This does. Coming home to you, cooking dinner together, talking about our days. The money can buy me a lot of things, but it can't buy me this. Maya felt her anger starting to soften, which scared her. But you lied to me about who you are. No, David said firmly. I lied to you about what I have, not who I am. The man who proposed to you in that snow-covered garden is the same man standing here now. I also happen to run a multi-billion-dollar company. That weekend, David asked if she wanted to see his other life. Not to pressure her, but to show her the complete picture of who he was. They drove to Miller Industries' Chicago offices in David's real car, a Tesla Model S that he'd been keeping in a garage downtown. The building was impressive but not showy, and Maya could see David's influence in the design. Lots of natural light, living walls full of plants, spaces that felt more like a tech startup than a traditional corporation. Everyone here knows about us, David explained as they walked through the offices. I've never hidden our relationship from my professional life. I just hid my professional life from you. Maya met David's assistant, his head of operations, his research and development team. They all treated her warmly, like they'd been waiting to meet her for months. A few mentioned how happy David seemed since getting married, how much more relaxed he'd been. He talks about you constantly, said Sarah, the head of their environmental initiatives. We were all dying to meet the woman who got our workaholic CEO to take actual weekends off. The strangest part was seeing David in this environment. He was completely himself, still kind, still interested in everyone's ideas, still passionate about sustainable technology. But he was also clearly in charge, clearly respected, clearly operating at a level Maya had never imagined. This is who you really are, Maya said as they sat in David's corner office, looking out at the Chicago skyline. This is part of who I really am, David corrected. The same way you're part marketing professional, part daughter, part wife, part community volunteer. People are complicated. That evening, David showed Maya financial documents that made her head spin. Not just his personal wealth, but the charitable foundation he'd mentioned in that overheard phone call. Millions of dollars going to education programs, environmental protection, disaster relief. I wanted to tell you about this especially, he said, showing her a program that provided college scholarships to first-generation students. I was thinking we could work on this together. Use your marketing background to help us reach more eligible students. Maya stared at the papers. You want me to help you give away money? I want us to build a life together that matters. The money is a responsibility, Maya. It's a tool for making the world better. But I need a partner who shares those values, not someone who just wants to spend it. For the first time since discovering the truth, Maya felt like she understood. David hadn't been testing her worthiness to access his wealth. He'd been trying to find someone who would help him use that wealth responsibly. I need time to process all of this, Maya said finally. I know. Take all the time you need. And I need you to promise me something. Anything. No more lies. Ever. About anything. Even small things. Even things you think might hurt my feelings or complicate our lives. I promise. Maya looked at her husband, really looked at him, seeing all the layers she was just beginning to understand. He was still the man who'd taught kids to plant tomatoes in that community garden. He was also the CEO of a major corporation. He was still the man who'd proposed with a vintage ring and tears in his eyes. He was also someone who could afford to buy her anything in the world. He was complicated. Their marriage was complicated. Their future would be complicated. But some things were simple. She loved him. He loved her. They both wanted to build something meaningful together. Okay, Maya said. Let's figure this out. Together. Together. 6 months later, Maya left her nonprofit job to become the head of community outreach for the Miller Foundation. She still lived in their modest apartment, though now by choice rather than necessity. She still shopped at farmers markets and rode bikes along the lakefront. But she also learned to navigate charity galas and business dinners. She learned to manage wealth in ways that aligned with her values. She learned that marrying rich didn't have to mean losing herself. It could mean finding new ways to make a difference. The truth was, Maya had married a poor man. Poor in spirit, rich in love, committed to using his resources to lift others up. She'd also married a billionaire. Smart, driven, successful, carrying the weight of responsibility that comes with tremendous wealth. Both things were true. Both things mattered. And somehow, impossibly, it all worked out. Because love isn't about what someone has in their bank account. It's about what they have in their heart. And David's heart, that had always belonged to her. If you enjoyed this emotional journey of love, secrets, and second chances, make sure to subscribe for more incredible true stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. What would you do if you discovered your spouse had been hiding their true identity? Have you ever fallen in love with someone your family didn't approve of? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one.